welcome to the Wisdom Check by Tabletop to Keyboard. This is going to be our bi-weekly podcast where we discuss things such as Dungeons and Dragons. Actually, I think maybe we need to turn up my mic a little bit, guys. How about some more game?
This is the Wisdom Check! This is the intro to end all intros. Talk about Dungeons, Dragons, and
Now, I don't think that's proper. This is a family show after all. This is the intro we can use, fellas. It's good, clean fun for everyone. Welcome to the Wisdom Check, where we have wholesome conversations about the dilemmas we face every day.
Nah, hold on a second. I got your intro right here. Yeah, that's better. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. Well, I'm right, Jeff's wrong. We're going to have guests on to talk about it. It's going to be awesome, because I said so.
He is right. He did say so. I don't know. Is surf music the best music for a podcast about D&D?
Fuck yeah.
Okay.
This just in, nobody can agree on our intro for this podcast. So we're just going to start. Welcome to the Wisdom Check. Roll for initiative. Fuck. A 1. It's like every time.
All right. Welcome, everybody. It's another edition of the Wisdom Check. I am Dustin. With me always over there is Jeff.
Hey.
And situated there between us today is Wiley. Karmic Cycle, Wiley from the Wileyverse. Go ahead and say hi to the crowd.
Wileyverse shirt.
He's got his merch on.
He's got his merch. Guess who else has got merch?
Does. Oh, look, we got merch too. Oh, man.
I don't know what else I got here.
Let's see if it shows up in the camera these days.
Oh, look at that mug.
All coming soon to a merch store near you. All right.
Loving it.
So, right up off the top, we do have a few things we need to throw a few announcements in there for. First and foremost, we would like to thank our new sponsor. We have a sponsor, Die Hard Dice. You can find their link down there in the panels below, where at some point during the show, if you want to, you can click on that. It'll take you to their website. You can browse all sorts of kick-ass dice. They're sending me a couple of sets of dice to do a giveaway soon, and what I'd like to do is have those when we hit 200 followers. So if you can see up there, we're at 171 at the beginning of this broadcast, and we would like to get to 200 real soon so we can give those sexy dice away to some of you faithful viewers.
And man, are they ever really sexy. Like, if you haven't checked those out, definitely check them out. Bring them up in a second screen. Find your favorite set. Mention what their name is on screen, and we'll see if those are the set we're actually getting or not. And you may be lucky enough to be one of a couple people that get some of those. And I think we'll get more to hand out probably if we can show that we can get some traffic going to that site. So help us out with that. Help our sponsor out with that as well. Now, try not to hiccup in the middle of a statement there.
All right. The other thing that you'll notice on our overlay today is we have a Destination Fantastic Kickstarter that we are starting to raise money for, because we have Satine Phoenix coming to our show August 12th. And their Kickstarter unfortunately ends August 5th, I think, the week before. And so we want to be able to get a donation in there to their Destination Fantastic Kickstarter. So what we're doing in the meantime is, if you would donate with the tip jar down there in the panels to us, it goes to that Destination Fantastic Kickstarter. And the money that we collect through that will not only show up there on screen, but we will also be donating all that to Destination Fantastic as a donation from TT2KB. So
yeah, and if you don't know what that is by now, it is definitely well worth a look. I checked out the Kickstarter video for it, and it is a really cool concept. So the idea behind it, we'll probably talk a lot more about it when we have her on. But they're going to the places where all the myths and stories that kind of formed Dungeons and Dragons came from. So we're talking about going to Scandinavia, looking at their folklore, and finding the original stuff from the original people, and showing it from the perspective of gamers. It's really freaking cool. So they're going there. They're going to check out the Hobbitville over in New Zealand. They're going to different countries all around, looking at just awesome stuff. And it's just a show that I think will actually be thoroughly entertaining. So if we can get that kickstarted, I think that's going to be well worth it. And if we get some swag from that, we'll be giving that stuff away too. So you guys will have that to enjoy.
So, but bringing us back to why we're here today, we have Wiley with us. So coming to us all the way from parts of Arizona.
Parts unknown, as we call it.
Hopefully dodging the monsoons, as he was telling us, that are going on out there. So, Wiley, first, welcome to the show.
Home in time.
Welcome, man.
You have one of the best looking setups of any of the shows that I watch. You always have that fantastic shelf there behind you, just sprawled out with games and movies. You always get, the lighting and everything, and there was always fantastic. I'm always incredibly envious of, I don't know if that's a man cave that you have or just like a study, but I've always been very envious of your game space because it's totally awesome. So
it's just a study, a family room or extra room that we have. But I know it's because I'm in the studio and I got these bright lights, but man, do I look pasty compared to you two. I am just super pale right now.
Well, it'll happen sometimes.
Oh, so
you do have much better lighting.
Don't go out in the sunlight.
It just combust instantly, like the vampires we'll be discussing later.
You can feel the skin cancer.
So good. Well, speaking of vampire, looking off screen for you here at the home viewers, look at this stack of amazing books he's got chilling here.
Slide them there in front of him.
See if we can fit it in frame. I don't know if it's going to all fit. These are the old school books mixed with some of the new school.
Yeah, this is the Requiem. This is the 4th edition, but all the others are 1st edition.
Yeah, it brings back some memories for sure. So it looks like you've been playing Vampire and World of Darkness stuff for a while. Was that the game that got you started, or is that something you kind of came into?
No, it is not the game that I started. I got started with Dungeons & Dragons basic set red box.
Oh, yes.
When my brother got a hold of one when I lived in New Jersey. This had to be 88, 89. And he had to hide it from our mother. And I know this was a topic, going into the whole gaming culture change, but we had to hide that box set from our mother. And when she discovered it, she wanted us to throw it out, and we had to convince her that it wasn't devil worship and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty crazy.
Kids, the satanic panic was a real thing.
It was a real thing. Yeah.
And not that we want to out anyone's ages, but around what time frame are you looking at the point that you got into it?
I'm 41, so I got in 88, 89. I got introduced to it, but I really didn't start playing until I came out to Arizona in 93.
That sounds real familiar.
So around the early to mid 90s is when you kind of started getting into gaming. And it's just important to reference that, because when we start talking about stories from our past, I think it's just important for viewers who may be watching this even after the fact on YouTube or other places to get an idea of what time frame we're covering. So we're talking from the early 90s till now. So if some of you are older gamers who go back even further, you might even find there was different gaming cultures even prior to that. Because I don't, off the top of my head, know when Dungeons & Dragons got started, but I have a feeling it was
77.
Yeah, I wanted to say I thought it was late 70s.
The TSR got founded in 77, but the first book didn't get published till 78.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. It's amazing because it seems like a long time ago, but then also it seems very recent, in terms of things. To imagine that there was a time when really role-playing in the sense of tabletop role-playing really didn't exist. Yeah. I'm thinking, was that really the origin? Was it from wargaming straight into Dungeons & Dragons?
Yep, chainmail. It was based off chainmail, and they wanted to do a little bit more in-depth. They wanted not an army, but a single character, and they wanted to tell a story about that character. So it's
amazing to think that was a transformation, right?
Yeah.
that was like this pivotal moment where you jumped into something completely different.
It's the same with video games. When you had Warhammer, and then Warhammer 3 came out, where you had that focus on that hero, and then boom, next thing you know, World of Warcraft, and it's all about the individual at that point. You're a special snowflake in the middle of a giant army of snowflakes. At that point, you're you're very much the individual that the story seems to gravitate around a little.
Yeah, very much so. So getting started back then, you said it was your brother was involved. what kind of group of friends did you have around that? Was that something you kind of all got into, or was that something you had to like sneak in and be like, yo, hey, check out this thing?
Oddly enough, in New Jersey, I wouldn't have been able to find anyone that gamed. Just none of it was not on the radar of any of my friends. I would have not known where to go. I don't even know where my brother got the books from. But when I came out to Arizona, like immediately I met friends and they played D&D. And I'm like, was blown away by it because I'm like, oh, this is a niche, rare game. It's going to take forever for me to find anyone like that. And I started to hang out with this guy named Mark, and he's like, oh yeah, we play D&D after school every day. So I'm like, huh. And then my brother found a group. So I had like two groups going on. I had one my age, a bunch of friends, and then I was also playing with like some college kids that were my brother's friend group. So that was interesting because they had been playing for a lot longer than I had. So like they remembered Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition, where in '93 I went from Red Box right to Second Edition AD&D. Yeah.
So, boy, that book definitely took to the sun pretty hard. I left it in the back seat of a car, and it was the most bleached out cover I've ever seen in my life. Everything turned kind of this weird purple color. Man, it's classic.
I'll be right back.
Sure. Looks like he's fetching a legendary faded book.
So we put ours in these like old cover.
Oh, smart man.
Yeah. So this is my AD&D Second Edition, old character sheets.
It's just still got the sheets in it.
Yep. Every one of my books back there still has character sheets. And all
surprised you're not having to wear the preparator gloves so it doesn't turn to ash.
I've got some rough ones. My Earth Dawn, if you watched my Wiley vs. Mitch for Earth Dawn, my Earth Dawn book, spine came off. Everything is falling apart on that book.
Well, and that's the funny thing about those old time books, right? They seem to be obviously scraping the barrel trying to get this product out. And maybe it was just the books I personally purchased, but every one of them, the spine snapped and tore out, within like a month or so of having the book. It's just.
And living in Arizona, I had another issue, which is if you leave a book in a car, it warps. Like the heat just
bends it.
Bends it.
Yeah, for sure. So, okay, you found a group of friends, luckily. Was there anything in particular that kind of made them more inclined to be into the game? Were they into other kind of nerdly pursuits, I guess? Or was that kind of like the first and foremost thing they were into?
No, they were kind of like the misfits, but not really as well. Like my buddy Mark played football. He was kind of well known. He was the softball coach in high school, helped with the softball team, but also a big nerd, like comic books. He introduced me to ElfQuest. You know what that is?
Yeah, that was the first thing I played, man.
I love the ElfQuest RPG. It's back here somewhere too.
Oh man, that's
so
crazy.
He had all the graphic novels, and I read them all. He introduced me to that. So he played the original. What's the space game with the cat people?
Oh man, I know what you're talking about, but I can't
Wing
play
Commander. Yeah,
Wing Commander.
The original Wing Commander. Like, and on those old computers, it chugged. But yeah, it was a weird anomaly here in Arizona. Like the combination of, I guess it's because people have a lot more indoor time.
Yeah,
you don't go outside. So like you find these pursuits that you can do indoors, and it was before video games really were around. So they found comic books, they found RPGs. I was pretty lucky in that regard. So
I'm wondering also if maybe it has something to do with the environment you're in, because like thinking about this Destination Fantastic thing, they're talking about the first episode was like at a glacier around volcanoes and like weird, just geography. And you look at Arizona and kind of the Grand Canyon area, the desert. There's something very primordial about that, and that kind of, to me at least, elicits some kind of supernatural kind of mythology.
Even just the Native American culture here and all the the spirituality, all of that, like it's pretty big here. You can feel that there's something bigger going on, type of thing. Like big sky, really you can see for miles. There's this history here, cave paintings and civilizations that are just gone that you can drive in and see cool. There, the remnants of them almost perfectly preserved. It is pretty interesting. Like you wouldn't find that in Jersey.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so, sure.
I'm wondering if that's what kind of draws people's attention to it. 'Cause, you think like here in Chicago where I'm at, you look up at the sky, you can't see a single star. You're not going to be inspired to be into astronomy if you can't see a star in your backyard. But you grow up around, big sky country out in the middle of the country where we grew up. You look up at the sky, you see stars everywhere. It's like, maybe even see the Milky Way clear as it is. And I wonder if it's kind of the same concept. You get kind of a little taste of this kind of supernatural, interesting, kind of metaphysic-y, deep, rich history. And then you look and you go, oh, I could tell stories about this. So I don't know, maybe that's the tie-in.
Yeah, the stars are big here because there's lots of astronomy telescopes out here, lots of observatories. So there's actually like light pollution laws. Our street lights, half of them are not on at any given time. They kind of rotate.
Oh, that's cool.
It's pretty interesting.
So we got DL Pancake down in the chat asking if there are any good cons out there by you out in Arizona.
Oh, Phoenix Comic Con is pretty damn huge. I was shocked by it. And it's like right in the middle of June or July, or like it just happened a little while ago, in August. It is hot as hell, like 105 or 110 in Phoenix, and people are in their full cosplay costumes and everything. God. I'm like, I would just die. But it is large. It is like the entire old downtown of Phoenix is just packed with nerds. It's amazing. All the hotels, every floor, like every little open space is just board games and gaming going on 24/7 for those days. It's really cool.
Man, that actually covers tabletop gaming, not just comic books.
Oh yeah. It's big for tabletop gaming.
They kind of combine it all in there in one con. Yeah.
Just get it all.
An amazing amount of crossover between those two.
There is.
I think most people that are into most people that are into gaming, I think, are into comics. I don't know if most people that are into comics are into gaming.
But you don't necessarily at the con see a lot of crossover. Like you go to Gen Con, there's not a lot of comic books at Gen Con. You go to Origins, there's not necessarily a lot of comic books. You go to Comic Cons, sometimes there's not a lot of actual gaming stuff there. There's people maybe cosplaying as game stuff, but
you always see shirts, right? You'll see somebody wearing a Wolverine shirt or something.
Sure, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So the reason why DL Pancake's probably asking that question is he is an artist, and he is really big at all these conventions. If you look down our panels below our stream, you'll see that we are actually sponsoring a giveaway with one of his pieces.
Indeed, we are.
And that will be at Gen Con. Phoenix Comic Con. That's big.
Yeah. We'll definitely check that out.
Tucson tried to have one called a RenCon. The first year was amazing. Will Wheaton came.
Oh, nice.
And he ran 3 sessions of a charity D&D game, and I got to play in one of those. So,
no kidding. What was that like?
Pretty amazing. It was 4th edition, and I've got a book, a player's handbook, signed by Will Wheaton. If you look at my YouTube channel, if you look at my YouTube channel and you scroll back far enough, you will see a video clip of Will Wheaton describing a skeleton raising.
Oh, nice.
So, it was a fun time.
That's a pretty awesome moment.
Yeah, that's a feather in the cap. It's like, we're in a game with Will Wheaton.
Isn't it kind of crazy to look back and think, Wesley Crusher from Star Trek is now one of the most important people in tabletop role playing.
It's crazy. The whole his D&D game that he ran with his brewing, he'd brew beer for the campaign.
Great idea.
And then he did that board game. I can never remember the name of the board game show where you basically explain a board game at every session.
So good.
And tying into Geeks and Sundry.
Oh yeah. And I think that's what it's taken for game culture to come around to be as mainstream as it is now. Is it's taken people with a little celebrity clout to kind of come out and start talking about how they had this hobby. When I was in high school, prior to high school, I was kind of an athlete when I was growing up. I played basketball, soccer, it was pretty much sports, all year round. And there wasn't anybody of any name drop that you could really talk about that played Dungeons and Dragons or anything else. There was no celebrity really involved in it at all. I remember when I first got involved in it in high school, it wasn't anything you went and really told anybody else about. You
No.
kind of, something you and your friends did, you wouldn't exactly tell your parents what you were doing. Like,
Firmly in that
hey,
closet.
going over to hang out at Jeff's house, you know, like you didn't really tell them like exactly what was going on, right? So it just always made them wonder what you were doing, and it was always worse than D&D, what they thought. But nonetheless, it wasn't something you really talked about a lot. And even, I remember a little older, getting into like Larp and stuff, like we would talk about things like gamer shame and these things. Like you just didn't talk about it in public.
No,
You didn't talk about it in a way anybody would. It was almost like you had like we've talked about this on an episode or two before, where you had like a secret code, right, of like words you could talk about, like to communicate these things without anyone else around you knowing what it was. So it's interesting to see how those things have changed over time. Because I remember, like, I think it was the Chronicles of Riddick.
Yep, that was where I was going to go.
Was the first time I heard of a celebrity that was like, this is based on my D&D game.
I was just about to bring him up. He's the one that I think blew me away the most. The reason he got all jacked is because he was tired of getting picked on for playing D&D and being a nerd.
Wow. See, kids, that's stay in school, play your tabletop role-playing games, and you too could be an action star, jacked and ripped in the future.
Yes. And then, all these people come like Joe Magnolia and Magnolia.
Impossible to pronounce name. Yeah, Joe Manganiello.
Mangeliana.
Something like that.
Right. I mean, and now you're just seeing more and more of it all the time coming out. Like, you're seeing more and more people that are, that had some celebrity to them coming out and saying this stuff. And then what happens is within a few short years, within a decade of like when Vin Diesel started coming out talking about this stuff, like now you have people who are celebrities just because they play D&D. You got the Matt Mercers of the world that they just made their name literally playing this game, and that's interesting to see that turn finally happening. Where now you get people who are making a name playing D&D. It's a fantastic thing to see. Like, it's really changed how acceptable it is.
I remember for me that the turning point of that and watching it happen was Penny Arcade. When Penny Arcade Tycho first got Gabe to play D&D, and they did Acquisitions Inc. with Jim Darkmagic. And then they went to PAX and played it on stage, and they packed that auditorium. And it's like, people are spectating people play D&D. I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever seen. There's no way that this can catch on. Like, there's not an audience for D&D. And then that's when it all started happening. The Critical Roles and all these shows that are coming out with Dungeons and Dragons and Twitch streams. Like, I never thought I'd be streaming Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, I never thought it too, but it is just kind of a culmination of the technology, I think. Once you get people who have some money and some production ability, some acting skill, a little bit of some acting skill, obviously actors that are making money doing it, getting involved, that really busted down the doors for us. And, I guess that, and then, professional esports probably did the rest of it, with Twitch really coming up, kind of pushing this idea of gamers being a actual medium to get involved in. I mean, they're not the same, but, it's definitely an interesting kind of time that we're in.
No, but there's enough crossover. There's enough crossover between tabletop gaming and computer gaming. Like, most of the people I know who are computer gamers, and I'm in an MMO guild, Plague, most of them play tabletop games to some degree. Yeah. And most people I know who play tabletop games also play video games. So when you're elevating one, you're kind of dragging the other up with it unintentionally. Even if that's not what you're meaning to do, that is kind of what you're doing.
For sure, yeah.
When you elevate any one part of nerd culture, you elevate all of nerd culture.
Right.
Now, we touched a little bit on the fact that you were getting into streaming similar to what we are. So you obviously run a stream, and it's special because it has the all Dragonborn cast. So what made you decide to do that?
Oh, I wonder if any of my players are in here. Giant Hippie, you still here?
I haven't seen any of them talk yet in chat. So if they are, they need to come represent.
Nice.
And
appreciate it.
He was back like right when the streams first started.
Much appreciated.
It was because I killed my entire party. That's what started it. I started streaming with a completely different game, and we were running Rifts as well. So I was streaming two. I was streaming D&D game and Rifts, Savage Worlds Rifts.
Mhm.
And they're like, okay, let's play some D&D. Let's go back to basics and see what the basics are. Sorry, my dog wants to give us background music with her collar. So I was, and they wanted to not have one of my usual games, which is a big sweeping arc and epic campaign type thing. So I'm like, okay, fine. I'll just run a down and dirty dungeon crawler.
Mhm.
Let's do it. And almost immediately I put a little MacGuffin in there just to get them started, and they would not shut up about the MacGuffin. So it became a big epic arc. Like they just kept following that MacGuffin, and I'm like, fine. And I did my first TPK. Like they got to a situation that I hit them with a spell. Every single person in the party failed their saving throw, and then every single person that was still up, I think, dropped after the first round, and then every single person failed all 3 of their death saves.
Wow.
So it wiped everyone out, and we had an hour to kill in the stream. So we just sat there and we talked about what we wanted to do next, and they said, let's all do magic users. And I'm like, okay, well, if we're going to all do magic users, then let's like make it together. Can we all be elves or all be this? And they settled on Dragonborn. So the Dragonborn campaign was born.
Aha, I see what you did there.
If you didn't watch last Wednesday, because Wiley's stream is on Wednesday nights, and that's about 11 p.m. Central Time here for me. So all of you out there can adjust accordingly. But that game almost ended Wednesday.
Really? Oh, no.
They finally fought this adult or older red dragon. I was reverse engineering your stats as you were kind of revealing them, and I came to the conclusion it was an adult. I might have been one age category low, but it was right there around that adult range. And they're only a party of 3 plus your NPC that you run.
Ooh.
And they almost did not make it as you continued recharging that breath weapon just about every round.
Yep.
And why don't you go ahead, Wiley, and tell the viewers how your party was saved?
In my chat, if you subscribe or you follow or you give us bits, you get inspiration in the chat. Mm-hmm. And you can use that inspiration to give any character or any monster advantage on a roll.
Nice.
So basically give them a reroll. And they had all failed their saving throws a second time for the breath weapon. And we had just gotten a raid that had literally the turn before a raid of 9 people came in, and we had 7 follows and 3 subs and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, so man.
All these people just gave their inspiration to the party and allowed them to get their rerolls in and save against the breath weapons so they could barely survive.
Man, they were
literally saved by a raid of viewers. It was pretty awesome. It was just me watching them, and I threw my inspiration already in there.
And it was on the dragon, clearly.
It was on the whole fight was the dragon.
You refreshed that breath weapon for the dragon. You were ready for the TPK.
I was
that raid showed up and ruined your evil machinations.
I was rooting for that dragon, but then they just started pulling it out after all the inspiration started hitting. So it was really an interesting thing to watch, because we talk about how we want to monetize certain things in our game. We kind of decided we weren't going to do that for ours. So it's always interesting when I do see somebody who does it, and then it makes such a huge impact in the story in a positive way. Sometimes even boom, people dropping in and just literally saved the party. They were literally done if it hadn't been for that, and which you had no control over. Somebody decided to raid your channel and just dropped 15 viewers on you, and they all started following and going, "What's going on? They're fighting a red dragon and they're dying." You can give them inspiration, and next thing you know, boom, inspiration this, inspiration that. And
that's a magical point of time too, because you got the fans are excited because they're actually having an impact on the game. They're not sure where it's going. The players are like, oh my God, please come on, save us. It's got to be a really cool feeling of that tension and that release that happens in that moment.
Yeah, engaging our chat is been really good for us, and I didn't know which way we were going to go when I first started streaming. I'm like, are we just going to ignore the chat in game or whatever, and engaging with it. I put up a second monitor so my group can see the chat.
Yep, right over here to my right.
Yeah, and it's been really cool so far. We've got some people that want to can I roll up a character and play, and we're like, no, not so much, but we had a different use of inspiration like 4 or 5 sessions ago. One of our followers that has been with us for a long time spent his inspiration for literal inspiration to give the party more information about a lead.
Oh,
And
that's
it
clever.
actually changed the course of what they were doing, because they had 3 options ahead of them and they were going to ignore one of them, and that ended up being the one that they went to instead because they got a little bit more info. So engaging the chat was very cool for
And I'll
us.
tell you, it was super interesting just to see the energy level of your players during that whole thing, because it was so up and down. It was like, they were basically just getting pounced on, and then all that happened, and then you could just see like that little glimmer of hope in their eyes as they're bringing each other back from death, like from literal death at some points. Like I think the rogue went down like 3 times, like in almost
Oh my
consecutive
God.
rounds. Like it was.
So he kept telling me that he didn't get evasion until 10th level, and then I'm like, I just trusted my player, and I looked it up. I'm like, you got that at 7th level, man. You could have been taking half damage the entire time.
Wow.
Yeah, there was
That
someone
will
in
make a
chat trying to
difference.
tell him that too, and he's like, "No, it's not till level 10."
Yeah, and I backed him up, and I'm like, but he would have dropped like 1 time less, because
Always listen to your chat.
24 damage or whatever it was.
But it was a very impressive game. So I mean, just for everyone tuning in tonight, if you haven't checked out Wiley in his Dragonborn game on Wednesday nights, you really should. It is a fun game, and his players are fantastic. So they do a lot of good stuff.
I know I've stopped in and spent some inspiration at least once.
Yeah.
It was a good time. So,
Gotta throw out the devil, Mitch.
oh, nice. Got a little emoji action going on.
Yeah.
So, getting into that glimmer of hope thing you were talking about, let's dash that and let's get into this World of Darkness topic.
Oh, okay. So I actually had now there's like a line stacked up. I have a queue because I've going into my World of Darkness and how I was introduced to it also leads me into when I saw gaming culture switch and how I knew I was like, this isn't the same, gamer shame, RPG player shame that I grew up with anymore. So I was a D&D player, pretty much that's all I had experience with, and I had that 2 groups going on. I had my friends in high school, and I had these college friends, and the college friends went out and found even older friends to play Warhammer with, and those guys played World of Darkness and kind of introduced us to it. And it started with Werewolf, and we talked about this a little bit before stream. I loved Werewolf because I felt like I got to play the big badass hero, but that's also misunderstood. Like I love,
for sure.
Tapped right into my high school angst. I get to fight pollution and save the world, but no one trusts me, and everyone was out to get me. So that was great, and I loved it. I have just tons and tons and tons of Werewolf back there. But my friends in high school, they wanted to play Vampire.
Yep.
And I am a hero guy. If you watch my Dragonborn game, you can tell that I love the big epic heroes, and I love the good guys to win. That's just the way I am. I don't like playing evil games, and I was the only person that game mastered in my group, so they kept harping me to play, to run Vampire for them, and I'm like, I don't want to do it. I don't like it. And I finally broke down, and I said, all right, I'll run Vampire for you, but I'm not going to be nice, and you're not going to like it. And so I started running game, and everything was against them. Everything had a real consequence. All of the elders were using them as pawns, and everything was terrible for them. And they loved it.
Yeah.
They absolutely loved it. I couldn't, I was just now stuck playing, running Vampire. That's all my friends wanted me to run. I ran 4 or 5 campaigns that went a year or longer.
Very nice.
So that is how I got into Vampire. And yeah, they loved that drama. They loved that terrible things happening to them and kind of dragging themselves out. It was like a soap opera week to week. And I kind of started treating it like that. I changed my GM style, obviously, because you can't just D&D that game up. So I just would make all of these plot lines and all these elders. It's somewhere back here. I have this entire book and just list every clan, every person in my city, what their agenda is, who they're working for, and what they want, what they're going to use the players for, type of thing. And man, it was a very interesting time going through all that and just watching, like, doing the most horrible stuff to my players. I killed one of their, like, moms in one of the
Oh
games.
man.
And that was my girlfriend at the time, and she didn't talk to me for an entire weekend.
The real world of darkness.
Yeah, like, it was just bad. But this is also, like, so the people I was playing with, besides my high school friends, when we graduated high school and they all left, and I was still in Tucson, and a couple of my friends are still in Tucson, we somehow got hooked up. Like, we're in college. We got hooked up with a bunch of high school kids. So, like, the cycle repeated. So all of my high school friends that are now in college, their cousins and their little brother and little sister that were now in high school started hanging out with us. And they never played before in any game. And I'm like, hey, you want to play something? Want to try? And I think, right after New Year's Eve, so it was a brand new year. It was 2001, I believe. I ran them all through Hunter the Reckoning because I thought it would be the perfect introduction. Because if you know nothing about the World of Darkness or gaming, that's a great entry point because the characters know nothing about World of Darkness and any of that stuff. So I went through that, saw who was into it and who wasn't, and a group of 8 got down to a group of 4, and we started playing Vampire. And they all just sunk their teeth into it, got really into the game, and one of them got really into the game, buying the novels, buying the books herself, reading it. And that's where I started to see that shift because of the gamer shame. She comes up to me one day and was like, she had the Malkavian Handbook, and she was reading it. And I don't know if you've ever seen the Malkavian Handbook.
Yeah, it's all crazy. You turn the book upside down, look at it in
You have to do it in the mirror. There's an entire chapter that's done in
little spiral.
The spiral is cool, but the ransom note, there's an entire chapter in ransom note type. And she was reading it at a coffee shop, and this older lady, looked over her shoulder and saw all this weird stuff going on and asked her about it. And my friend's like, oh yeah, I just told her about it for like 45 minutes.
Wow.
I'm like, what? Like, man, I would have like packed up and left.
Yeah.
Unless I would have done that.
Roll up in my trench coat and leave.
Yeah, like my old thing is when people ask me when I have gaming books out in public, which is very rare. Like, oh, what's that? I go, it's for a video game or something like that. Like, that seems to be the answer that gets them to stop being interested and go somewhere else. But man, she's just like, yep, I talk about it to everyone.
That's funny because like we may still have that lingering gamer shame, so that's kind of our reaction. But this idea of kind of cross-generational gaming is really important. Like in your story of getting into it, it was an older group of people that brought you into the game. When I got started, it was an older group of people that got me into the game, and then I sent it out to my friends, and we all kind of got into it. And I know Dustin here is running games for his kids, right? Hopefully coming soon.
We're starting to. We haven't. They're really busy with the plays and stuff right now, so their evenings are all spent out at play practice. But we're getting raided by Laugh Love Lindy. Thank you for the raid, Lindy.
Yeah, boy.
Always good to see Lindy
all.
stopping by. Thank you, Lindy.
17 of y'all.
Impressed.
Good Lord. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Well, we should probably replug our donation thing down there.
We should, real quick.
Fantastic. If you are a fan of travel shows and of gaming, then Destination Fantastic is a Kickstarter you should definitely get behind. Our guest in August 12th, Satine Phoenix, and her buddy on that are doing this show, and they're trying to raise $100,000 to get a pilot episode going. And last I checked, they were a little over halfway there. And
there's about 2 weeks left in the fundraisers, the Kickstarter as well.
Yeah, and if you want to donate to that, if you look down below in our little panels, we have a tip jar. And anything that goes in that tip jar is going to be collected and applied to this Destination Fantastic Kickstarter. And we unlock certain gifts if we donate enough. And those gifts we're going to actually donate to our chatters. So if you want to donate, it may come back to give you all kinds of cool stuff, like signed piece of what was it, like postcards. There was like a pen. There was some like unique art. There's like little booklets. You get all the episodes that they record. A bunch of other cool stuff. It's going to be really neat.
That's right.
Like
Team Phoenix, that's a awesome person to have. You know,
So good.
like,
And if you're just rating in and you haven't had a chance to, if you follow us now, we get that number up to 200. We've got 2 sets of Die Hard dice coming to us. Our sponsor's given 2 free sets away of metal dice. They're super awesome, about $60-some value each, from what I can tell. So definitely give us those follows. We'll get to 200, and we'll be giving them away soon.
Oh yeah, those Die Hard dice are freaking cool too.
And if for any reason you decide to sub us now in between August 12th when Satine Phoenix come here, we're going to be doing some sub-only questions. So all of our subs will get a chance to send a question in here to TT2KB, and then we will be asking her live on the show. So you'll get a little name drop credit in there as well if you sub.
And wait, but there's more. If you also look down at the panels, you will see TT2KB is doing a Gen Con giveaway. And you'll see a really amazing sculpt. We have the artist in chat right now, DL Pancake. And it is a dragon-mounted head there. And if you go to Gen Con to booth number 469 and you sign up for our giveaway, you will have a chance of walking away with that awesome piece of art. So go check that out. And now that that's all of our plugs thoroughly dumped in here, we'll get back to talking to Wiley. And we've been talking about his kind of entry into gaming culture, how he got his start back in the day, as we're going to call it tonight. And
a Tuesday.
Yeah, back in a Tuesday. And we're going to be talking about some of the changes in game culture that have kind of taken place over the time we've been playing, and in particular, how that kind of shift has affected one game in particular that he's got a mountain of books for sitting next to him.
Right.
And actually, just as a side note, it was actually our talk with Lindy about a month ago when she first kind of clued us in that this was going on out there, because I had not really kept up with a lot of, there was so much 5th ed stuff we were getting into that we hadn't really taken a lot of time to keep track of World of Darkness stuff that was going on. So, you know, the first I had seen anything of it was actually on Wiley's show. He does a segment every now and then of Mitch versus Wiley, when Mitch is one of his players. And they will sit down and just go, and he will basically just teach Mitch a new system and just sit down and make a character. And that's what they were doing for the new vampire game when I tuned in one night and when this whole conversation with me and Wiley kind of first got started.
And it's really awesome because we talk about it all the time in here, but Dustin and I had quite a long stint of running a vampire LARP. And so we came up as young, stupid high schoolers sneaking off to the college town to go play, and then eventually became college-age kids playing the game. And then at some point, we were the old people hanging around with college kids running the game. And then we were retired, and then, as always is the case, they drug us back, kicking and screaming to run it one more time.
Once you think you're out, they drag you back in. So someone, first off, Giant Hippo is calling me out that I'm the one that introduced him into RPGs. Apparently he'd run one D&D session before, but that's that's Lord Savroth in my game. That's Dayton.
Oh, awesome.
And
There's
Robert is also here.
Hey, welcome, guys.
And someone was calling me out on my impressive stack. This is just what I could find of my vampire first edition. As you can see, I have one bookcase back here. There's 2 more, and boxes, and 3 more shelves over here. But that's just my vampire. I did everything. I did werewolf. I did mage. I did changeling. I did mummy. I did demon.
Oh, man, mummy.
I did them all. My favorite one, my sleeper hit, was Orpheus. I really loved that game.
We never played Orpheus that I'm aware of. That's crazy. Yeah, it snuck in this like little lull in our World of Darkness time. I don't remember what was going on around then. Must have been we were just really getting back into D&D.
Yeah, I think it was during a time we kind of got back into D&D again. Probably, yeah. I don't remember exactly the timeline. I was trying to think of when Pathfinder came out, when we put 3.0 and 3.5 kind of angered us a little bit. We kind of got away from some D&D there for a while when they basically put out a second set of the same books. It was like, here, buy the books again. We were like, really? Come on. But Yeah. So, but I think that was maybe kind of more in the timeline of when we went around with that. But I think what's interesting is when we talk about these things, we have to date them. You got to remember we're talking like the mid to late 90s when we first got into some of this stuff. And when you look at everything that was popular in culture at that time, talking like your grunge scene, you're talking about
The
Explosion of grunge.
yeah, the explosion of grunge. You're talking about when you think about movies and stuff, you're talking that's when the first X-Men movies were coming out and Wolverine became a big deal. Batman was a big deal. The Tim Burton Batman was out at that time. And what you saw was The Crow. Oh my God, The Crow. Forget that. Everything in pulp culture at the time was all about the anti-hero. The brooding, dark, mysterious dude who hung out in the corner. Whether or not he had superpowers is irrelevant. But it was a point where that was what was favored over the kind of Boy Scoutish Superman, Captain America, types. Like those kind of tropes were considered cliche. Nobody wanted to see those. They wanted to be the bad guy to a degree. So Vampire was very intriguing.
This. Yeah, because we talked about this a little bit before the stream, and we were trying to figure out what was going on. I think I've come up with an idea, and tell me I'm wrong here in a second. But if you think about the timeline of this, up until around that point, it was basically Cold War. So we had propaganda, we had a big enemy that we all had to watch out for. We were a threat of nuclear annihilation. The world is scary. We don't need any more of that, right? So if you're in that environment, you don't need dark and brooding. Your life is dark and brooding. And then all of a sudden, this wall comes down, and we're in a world where everything's gray, and there isn't any defined enemy. Economy's doing what it's doing. We're kind of like in these weird wars, sort of in the Middle East, that kind of matter to us, but don't matter to us in the same way that other wars had been. And suddenly, what's more interesting is what's going on in my neighborhood and this weirdness over here and my relationship to that person. And you know what? Propaganda is for, lame people and whatnot, fill in your word there, whatever you want to pick. And I kind of wonder if that's what it was. When the world is in turmoil, you want black and white good guys. And whenever it's in some kind of, peace, settled lull area, you need something spicy. And it can't all be spicy.
It could be, but I think that the explosion of the internet has a lot to do with this also, and the way that information and things are proliferated. And this is where I think Vampire in the World of Darkness gets in trouble these days. And we know there's a lot of controversy going on around this game now because of the most recent book put out. But if you really think about what those games ask you to do, is to take on that role of that anti-hero, and not even sometimes a hero. Sometimes they're just plain monsters. You're playing the bad guy. And like you said, you like the heroes and the epic campaigns. What World of Darkness asks you to do is dump all that on its head and take over basically a group of bad guys who maybe aren't the worst guys, because there's still guys out there technically that are worse than them. So you got some people you can go without conscience, just go beat up to a degree or deal with these sort of things. But at the same time, you yourself are not a good person. If your character kind of even starts out good, the game kind of mechanically eventually draws you down the path of not being good anymore. Yeah. So if you aren't the terrible worst thing you can think of, that's your end goal of where you're going to end up. And that takes you down a lot of paths that a lot of people in 2019 don't want to go down anymore because of what's going on in our world. And I think that's really where the World of Darkness, and in particular Vampire, really has a steep hill to climb to win over modern gamers.
Well, and I think there is an element there that is at play with this recent fiasco. Because in the old days with Masquerade and even Requiem, it was very blatant. You are playing non-hero characters. Your characters are not good people. They're in a bad culture, in a bad setting, doing bad things. And everything is a drumbeat towards damnation. Like all the art reflected that. All the source material reflected that. And they even had baked in systems like the humanity system and a separation for the Sabbat where they didn't have humanity. They had paths of enlightenment that were like deranged, weird ways of thinking. And then in this new version, from what I understand, at least in the playtest material, they didn't even have a humanity system in play at all. So this whole concept of like, hey, the entire point, this path to damnation, suddenly is a do what you want to do with it. You've got a lot of cool powers. Live that power fantasy of being sexy, strong, king of the night, or queen of the night or whatever. But you don't have the anchor point of, you're the bad guy, in spite of everything you want to do. I think that maybe
the final product does have humanity in it now.
Oh, good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that was I wanted to touch on that, but someone was talking about Tim Bradstreet. I actually have a funny story about high school and Tim Bradstreet and his art, which I'll get to in a second. But I want to talk about humanity. When I first got introduced to Vampire, and I was seeing like the high schoolers play it in dark corners and hallways, and during lunch, they're squirreled off and playing some Vampire because they hate their parents and they hate the world and they hate themselves and they want to be the bad guy for a while. It's pretty much like they ignored the whole humanity system. They were like out there just to get their power fantasy on and kill whoever they want without repercussion and things like that. And when I read the game for the first time because my friends wanted to play, and I this is not what I've seen at all. Like, the humanity system is huge and it is punishing.
So important. Yeah.
And like, once you lose it all, you're done. Your character is dead to you. Like, you have to make a new character and that's gone. And like, so that really like changed. That's why I was like, this is going to be brutal. This is going to be bad. And you're not going to like it because they couldn't just go out and do whatever they wanted. They had to, when you really play it, and it's, I think, out of the grasp of high school kids really get into that meta of humanity and what it is to be moral and what those things mean. Like, when you're an adult looking at this game, it's nuanced. Like, it's pretty good. And you're telling a tragedy. Like, you're telling of a person that was a normal life and is going to lose it all. And it's out of his control now, their control.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the game is it's a tightrope walk. If you do it right and you give it the gravitas it needs and the respect it needs to actually run good scenes and have interesting search through the moral landscape, it's a really good game. But if you misstep, and it's easy to do, it turns real bad real fast.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's something we touched on a lot in LARP, but like, every one of the vampire abilities, they were called disciplines. Every single one of them, even the ones that don't seem to be on the surface, every single one of them was dehumanizing for the user or for the people affected by it. So, I mean, the obvious ones, of course, are like dominate, mind control. Like, that's clearly pretty evil. No matter how you slice it, taking away somebody's free will, that's bad.
Taking away their agency. Like, the entire first season of Jessica Jones is about that.
Exactly.
And watching people that I had to do what this guy said, and I did terrible things. Or was it him? But I still did it. It's in my mind. It was my hands.
Yeah, a lot of times players would say, okay, well, sure, dominate. Yeah, that's evil. But what about Auspex? Auspex was like these super senses and like telepathy and astral projection and stuff. Certainly that can't be evil. But then you look at it and you go, no, actually, you can read people's auras. You can invade their minds and see their inner secrets. That just concept is really dehumanizing. You don't need to talk to that person to know everything about them. You can, or obfuscate. Obfuscate was the ability to go invisible or change your appearance. And, people are like, well, there's no problem with that one, right? But then you realize by using that, you're putting this weird distance between you and the rest of the world. They don't know you're there. You're not part of that world anymore. And so you have this weird, awkward separation that occurs that dehumanizes the person using it.
Yeah.
And so there's like all these little subtle things that people just did not pay attention to.
If you get that high-minded about it, sure. Mm-hmm. I think the problem that World of Darkness sometimes has is that you get a lot of the power issues without a lot of the high-mindedness and reflection on what those are doing. What you got is you got people coming from a D&D landscape of power fantasy, walking in and going, look what I can do. Boom, 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 dropping bombs on people, punching people through walls, whatever they got, and not taking the moment to really, and that's where World of Darkness is so sometimes hard to run with players, because if you have to have that level of like as a player thinking like, what is this doing to my character as you go down that humanity path, like how it's pushing you down that way. But I don't think you get that as much as what you want to get that out of it.
Right, like seeing that or getting that character or that player that's self-aware enough to understand what's really going on behind the scenes for Vampire and what it does to a psyche, and ones that just don't want to run that power trip and say, I can make this guy do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm. And see, this is interesting because you guys, I think everyone here except for me, including our tech guy, loved Werewolf. And when I was young, I absolutely hated Werewolf. Like, that was the one I wanted to play the least. I had no interest in it. I guess it just didn't resonate with me. I wasn't an angry person. So like rage as a core concept didn't really appeal to me. But like, for some reason, Vampire was really, really fascinating to me. And I think it was because of these issues here, like the questions about morality and, like maybe the type of literature I was reading at the time, like, and that kind of stuff. But I always gravitated towards it, and obviously didn't have very many people to play with. So it's funny to see that kind of dynamic there, which games kind of attracted people.
Well, and it was interesting for our group because we went from Dungeons and Dragons 2nd Ed into the first World of Darkness games I played were Werewolf. And if we looked at those early Vampire and Werewolf games, we ran them very much like D&D games were run. Now, we were not a group. We did a lot of theater of the mind. We were not a group that when we ran D&D at the time had a lot of maps, minis, things like that. It was all like theater of the mind and maybe 2 Coke cans and a few extra dice we weren't using as just to mark kind of generally where we were. Like, it was not much. So moving into Werewolf and Vampire, which are built very much for theater of the mind anyway, like it was a natural transition in that way for us. But what was not a natural transition was flipping that switch on what our stories were supposed to be. Yeah. So our early Werewolf packs ran pretty much like super angry D&D groups, like the Murder Hobo to the Unteenth Degree was pretty much what we did with it. So when we kind of got into Vampire, it was kind of the first time we really broke from that, but it took a few games. And if you're in our Discord, you got to relive a little bit as we talked a little bit about how one of those Vampire games started that we ran. But it was very much kind of those early power fantasies, and we didn't run the games right. I don't think it was until we really got closer to LARP that we really kind of started to turn the corner on that as far as how we approach the World of Darkness. So sometimes it takes a little while, but I think that what we wanted out of that game changed a little, and I think how we ran it changed, and we got more high-minded about it, and then it wasn't quite so bad. But
I think that's
otherwise,
a byproduct of the style of LARP, right? So, like for vampire culture, you have to have this whole court. You have to have the important people, the low people. You have to have nuanced characters with motivations, and commingling, conspiracies, and getting boons and backstabbing and all this kind of stuff. And that's really hard to put together in a convincing way as a storyteller. Whereas when you have a pile of players walking around, all acting out their character, suddenly those things organically occur. And once you see it, you're like, oh, that's what this game is. I forgot. So, I mean, did you do any LARPing, Wiley? Or was it all tabletop?
I went to one LARP game here for our kind of local group for it, and it just
I also cut out a little bit. I didn't hear what you said.
It just wasn't for me.
Okay.
Our LARP group here was a bunch of people that were still power tripping. Like it wasn't a very nuanced game. They just wanted to kind of lord over each other with different powers and things. So I'm like, this is weird, and I don't have any history. They've been playing for years. They all knew each other. So it was very cliquish, and I'm like, I'm not going to step into this. So
yeah, that was if it was one world by night, then for sure, yeah, there was definitely cliques there for sure.
Yeah, and what's interesting about the Vampire and World of Darkness set in general is that because of the concepts and how perilous they are, it's such a minefield. You really need a group that really understands not only the setting in the game, but each other and like what is and is not in bounds, and how to navigate that together. And that's not an easy thing to pull off in a LARP, just because
Not in this modern day, for sure.
Yeah.
I think I'm becoming a meme in the chat.
Yeah, I believe so too. Hey, thanks for stopping by, BizLab. That's so funny. Yeah, they're getting you for your past life secret identity as a secret LARPer.
I LARP as a normal adult in my daily life, but I'm
actuality,
always a Wiley DM.
You'll know it's true when he puts on the little card that says "I'm wearing a suit" and just walks into. Work.
Yep.
I had that. My character was a Ventru hitman.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I had to have little, because I was just in jeans and t-shirt and little thing. I'm in a suit. Everyone else was actually in suits, like they had wardrobes. So I was the only one walking around with the card. So there's one little funny story about the time that I went. Is something happened, some large confrontation occurred, or someone kind of made a play for one of the power players in the place, and everyone kind of whipped out power quick. And one of the guys was a gangrel that they let have as his alternate animalism be a bear.
Okay.
So this was when he was transformed. He just there like this, and like I'd look over at him because we're paused in time. He's like, "I'm a bear."
Irony was
all right.
If you were an experienced like OWB and LARPer, you also learn that that's the same hand signals that werewolves have to use for Krynos form. So they probably got a lot of weird looks, like, because the gangrel form, it didn't matter what animal you were, you had to hold your hands out in front of you like this, like with their kind of a hand down. That was like the symbol for when you were in wolf form or whatever form they might let you reskin it as.
One thing I did take and we used for a long time was out of character. Our groups used that all the time.
So we just did
being
one
at the table.
Crossed, just like.
Oh yeah, they did one hand over their head.
Oh man,
out of character check.
Navicus doesn't know that there's signs for LARP. Yeah, no, there's for everything.
There's a LARP book that you got for Vampire that had like all the different symbols.
Yeah, Theater of the Mind book for Vampire. If you find it, it gives you all the hand signals that you have to use for different.
Theater of the Mind was you did the rock paper scissors. Conflict
until Requiem came out, they changed it with Requiem. But yeah,
and it's if you had disciplines or had advantage, you get to do best of 2s or 3s type thing.
Mm-hmm. It was a whole science. You had to learn it, have this whole secret language, because originally, I guess, the original LARPs were designed to be played out at bars. And you were supposed to play out this concept of the masquerade, which if you missed our previous episodes, we discussed this at length. But the masquerade was a concept that the world should not know of supernaturals. So think of like Men in Black, like they do whatever they can to keep it secret. So the idea was you're a group of vampires hanging out in a city, whatever city you happen to have been in, and you're at a freaking bar, and you got to play this game in character without anyone knowing you're playing this game or personifying a vampire. And so they had these little subtle sign languages and stuff, and they'd play rock, paper, scissors and stuff. But the idea was don't get noticed. So that's why they didn't have dice.
Yeah, I had a Mind's Eye Theater book, and that friend that got really into Vampire that I was talking about had the conversation at the coffee shop. I ended up giving it to her because I was never going to play it, and she found it fascinating, all the rules and the sign language and all that stuff.
That's awesome. So let's let's touch a little bit on this controversy, I guess.
Yeah, it is about time to kind of get into what's happened with it in more recent time.
One more story to tell about that person, though.
Rock it ahead.
Was the other time was totally blown away about the change in gaming culture and it becoming more accepted. The same person that had the 45-minute conversation with a friend in the coffee shop, or with the stranger in the coffee shop, we played on Sundays, and we were in a long-standing vampire game. I think it went 1.5 years. And for one reason or another, we had to cancel one of the games, and she was already over at my house, and she's like, "Oh, my coworkers are going to be really disappointed." And I'm like, "What? What do you even mean by that?" And she's like, "Oh, on Mondays I go in and I tell all my coworkers what happened in the vampire game, and they're following along like I'm recapping a TV show."
That's
And
amazing.
Wow.
she worked for a very big company in the patent office. So there's 2 patent lawyers, their paralegals, and their support staff, probably about a dozen people, all with college degrees, older folks, and they had been following my vampire game for a year almost. Every Monday, like it was a soap opera, they're getting a recap on from this girl.
That's amazing.
I was crazy. I was like, it blew me away. I'm like, what? That's like you're going to your professional place of work and talking about vampires and stuff like that. That is just so weird. Like I was embarrassed.
Around what time was that in the years?
Okay, so this was 2000. Let's say like probably about mid 2000.
Okay, 2005ish. That's still
a lot of those vampire movies and stuff were starting to come out.
definitely into Twilight time at that point.
What year did Underworld come?
Underworld was out by then.
Yeah,
there was probably several Underworld movies out at that point.
Yeah, I think some of that kind of opened the doors a little bit. Vampires were real in there for a little while.
That's when I kind of knew that that World of Darkness, that White Wolf was slipping, and that it had gotten too big. And because it used to be, you could go on the forums and you could see the posts from the CEO and all that stuff, and he'd be talking. But the lawyers took over, and the moneymakers, the accountants, and because when Underworld came out, they sued him like almost immediately.
Oh yeah.
And man, if there was still a game company run by gamers, they should have jumped right in bed with them. Hell, even offered to make them, do a partnership and make a supplement for the Underworld world in World of Darkness.
Yep. Yeah, they would have made a lot more money and had a lot better reputation coming out of that.
Yeah.
But companies rarely do the right thing the first time through.
Which is a great segue into
Ding!
talking about this controversy.
Kind of what's going on with the new version of the game.
Yeah, so apparently almost a year ago to the day, there was a big splash with, what do they call it? Vampire 5 or version 5 or something along those lines? The new version of Vampire. And there was a article put out by, what was this guy's name? It was Dog with Dice was the person who wrote this. And they were going full on in about how the new White Wolf marketed Vampire the Masquerade to the alt-right neo-Nazis. And they made this huge article about how there were themes and concepts laid out to appeal to fascists and to play on the idea of bloodlines and blood purity and basically like the power fetishism and kind of the diminishing of others. And they had a few things they basically kind of laid out that I don't know. It's kind of a weird gray area in the way it's described. Now, it kind of looking at the history of White Wolf and Vampire in particular, my first inclination is to look at it and go, yeah, they accidentally stepped in dog poo. It's easy to do. But the way this guy lays this out, there are a couple things that do seem a little on the edge that maybe weren't necessarily good decisions and may have actually been courting this. So it's hard to say. Have you guys been looking at this at all or heard anything about it?
I read it when it first came out, and I picked up my book before I heard about it. And I was wondering if I got one of the versions that was before they edited it. I don't know if they got them all or a printing went out, but I don't have the version where it has the neo-Nazi in the splat. So
yeah. So
I think they got all of those.
So what's being referenced there is there was a clan called the Bruja, and it's been there since the beginning. They're always these iconoclasts, the rebels, the edgy, violent, rowdy.
They were the anti-establishment punks. Right?
Yeah. And so they came in a lot of flavors. You had your Marxists and you had your Rage Against the Machine types, and then you had your, I don't know what other types you can really think of. But in this particular incarnation, they described it as you could play him as a deadhead, or you could play him as this, or as a neo-Nazi. And that was one of the things that grabbed a lot of negative press right off the bat. And, taken by itself, there's always been splat books about that era. And if you think about any kind of movies or genre of comic, there's always Nazis. But I think where they may have screwed this one up is they didn't present the Nazis as bad guys. They went, hey, you could be a Nazi.
Yeah, because it's the world of darkness and you're playing bad guys, remember? But that's kind of where, in my opinion, most of the world of darkness goes afoul. And Nabocus is asking a question. I'm going to get to this shortly. But, this is what we were kind of talking about. I think that the 90s was the era of the anti-hero. Everything was anti-hero. And we've been from 2005 until now. You're looking at, since Iron Man, 10 plus years of multiple Marvel movies a year. And you'll notice they started with Iron Man, not with Captain America, with Iron Man, because right then you were looking at a point where you had an anti-hero. He was a drunk. He sold weapons. He did bad things. He was the first hero they launched with, because they were still in that period in the late mid 2000s there. When you hit mid 2000, you were still kind of coming out of there. Marvel hits that 10 years later. Even Iron Man, Tony Stark right now, spoilers for all you people, he's a hero at this point.
He's a martyr.
Right, a martyr. So they took the guy who was the anti-hero, which was kind of a popular thing in the 2000s, early 2000s. They used him to launch their cinematic universe. 10 years of people wanting to see now, who's the big guy? It's Spider-Man. Spider-Man is the guy now, right? If you watch Far From Home, again, not going to get into spoilers here, but he's kind of the guy now. That's the direction that viewer bases are wanting to go. And when you look at this influx of players into gamer culture getting in with 5th Ed D&D, those are the kinds of people they want to be. I think that's why the 5th Ed D&D gravitates so heavily, because it lets you be whatever you want to be. World of Darkness, on the other hand, wants you to play these anti-hero tropes in a world where I don't think people are looking for anti-heroes. And that's where I think you get in trouble when they put something in there like, hey, you can be the neo-Nazi. 20 years ago, they weren't those kind of people standing in the streets holding signs and tiki torches and crap like you see in now, in the literal news. Yeah. So it ain't so funny anymore, right? It ain't fiction anymore. It's nonfiction. It ain't what it was. And I don't know if you can blame, to a degree, that there were spaces where this kind of stuff got to be harbored, even in the tabletop community. If those ideas were allowed to maybe find a place where they could continue to be passed around in these other forums. So now it's I think people just want to crush it completely. And I think that's why they're getting so hit on the head with this.
Yeah, I'm thinking the biggest issue is that, in these role-playing games and how popular role-playing games have become, it's talking about you're playing a character and that character goes out and does things. And going back to the Satanic Panic, people were worried that you were playing a devil worshiper, you were learning devil worshiping things. So you had to convince them that you played the hero. And that's the way games were. When you describe any of the role-playing games to the masses, you say, I'm the hero, I'm playing good guys, we do this. But they don't, there are games where you're not playing the hero. And I think Vampire's running afoul of that. You can play a neo-Nazi because you're not playing a good guy and you're going to fall. You can explore these horrible, horrible nuances of life, kind of outside of everything. We're not saying it's good. You're a terrible, terrible person. You're going to explore this horrible life of this person who's going to lose all their humanity. It's a monster.
Yeah, so you could get into that kind of what was that movie called? American History X. Right. That was a good example of looking at the issue. If you made a character in that kind of environment and had that kind of arc to it, that could be a story that had some legs. There was something worth telling in that story. But I don't know that's the story people are going to play.
Well, and American History X, again, came out in the late 90s. That was a time when those stories could be told and people would genuinely sit down and watch them. If that movie hadn't come out then, you rewrap that movie, put some younger star than Edward Norton in it probably at this point, drop it in 2019, I don't think there's people going to see that movie. Not like it was. I don't think it hits the same cultural place now. It's a lot different movie if you rewatch that in 2019. And that goes for a lot of things from that era. I'm not dissing on it just in general, but I'm just saying, like, you go back, like, it was an interesting side note, like just watching a Michael Jackson video, The Way You Make Me Feel. You watch that movie in 2019, or you watch that video for that song, it is a completely different video than when we first saw it in the 80s. Mm-hmm. What he's doing now is sexual harassment in that video. The way he trails her down the street after she tells him no and won't do that stuff. Like, you can't do that stuff in videos now and have it be like number one on the charts. It would get boycotted immediately. Like, that is how much things have changed. And I just don't know with the World of Darkness how you get over that hurdle with modern players.
It was interesting.
It almost begs the question of, is there a space in the gaming industry right now for the World of Darkness, for Vampire?
I think there is. It's just got to be approached the correct way with the right group. And, like, I'm going to get to Nabok's statement here in a second, but I think what gaming tends to be is a place for people to act out in a way that they can't in life, right? So, like, if you're in an environment where you feel powerless, like a lot of people probably feel this day and age, they see constant just trauma and danger and violence and awful things that are well beyond their means to control. You want to have the fantasy of Superman, somebody who can just snap their fingers, jump over a building and fix it, right? And you want to be Superman, right? Because you want to relieve this awful feeling that you can't make a change in the world. Whereas I think in the early 90s, the idea was, we just brought down the commies, the wall's crushed, we're so winning at this point, the economy's going well, that it doesn't matter what's happening. I can do whatever I want, anytime I want. So I'm bored. Let's see what else is out there. Let's check out what that weird corner is around the block. What's under this rock, And I think that you get into different types of characters and games depending on where you feel you are in the power curve of the world. Okay, and at this point, the question gets a little bit difficult and challenging, and we get into a topic that may be a little bit distressing for some viewers. It veers into some topics about sexual violence and how it pertains to the concepts inherent in the World of Darkness. So if you'd like to skip this section, I'll put a timestamp up right now so you can go ahead and skip right past that. For the rest of you here's the rest of the conversation. Now, to get to Nabok's statement here, unless you guys want to say something about that, they're saying that they play a lot of RPGs online and found a
lot of RPGs online.
Yeah, and they're looking at the concept of a game called Changeling. Now, Changeling is kind of like what was that director's name? Del Toro. I can't remember. Yeah. Guillermo del Toro, that does like Pan's Labyrinth. So if you imagine that movie, I think that is pretty close to nailing it for what Changeling is supposed to be. So there's like fairies, but not like in the sense of like everyone's a happy-go-lucky little pixie. But like,
but more often when you see it played, it looks more like Del Toro's Hellboy.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what it ends up coming out a lot of times.
This other crazy world of dreams and all, and just fantasies that exists, and only these half changeling people can get there and see this.
Mm-hmm. And what they're saying is that they're having a hard time finding games now without running into people running away from the game due to rape adjacent themes. Now, I don't know enough about Changeling to know what those friction points are, I guess we'll say. Now, a game like a Vampire, though, I think that's baked into the pie. Like the whole concept is essentially an extended metaphor for it. You have hunting and stalking, you have the sexual quality of feeding, you have just the physical act of fangs piercing skin. Like the whole idea is vampires in general is this whole like Victorian era, taking of innocence kind of thing. So I feel like vampire in itself is that is what it is, in a nutshell.
And almost always the person doesn't have a choice when they're embraced. Like it's done to them and they just have to deal with it. And they didn't have any consent or choice in the matter as well. So, and
that horror is supposed to be there. Like that is supposed to be a cornerstone of at least vampire. It's supposed to be, you look at it and you go, oh my God, this is horrible. Like, why would somebody do this to another person? Oh, look, my character is in the situation where they're now making that choice. Why? How did we get here? And I think that's where the interesting story is. But again, if you don't play it that way and you go into it going, I am an evil thing that just has powers. Cool. I can lift a car. I'm going to make more of me because we're going to live forever and kill stuff. Woo! Then you run into some serious problems.
I just think with a lot of modern gamers, with this influx of popularity of gaming, you're getting people who aren't coming into gaming to get very like introspective. Not in those ways. I think you see a lot of people who want to tell stories and evoke perhaps emotions in those stories. I'm not saying that they don't get emotional, but I don't think that as we talked about a few episodes ago about topical stuff, like how you would realize you had baked too much of your own life into your plot you were running. I don't think people want to do that. I don't think that's why they're getting into D&D. Like, I think that they're getting into that sort of thing because they want to escape those things. They're getting into gaming more as an escapism, idealization of what I want my life to be versus let's get down and gritty and use this like therapy. And I just don't think that's where people are wanting to go with it. And I just think that's where they run into these walls with the World of Darkness, that we didn't have those walls set up in front of us in the 90s the same way that they do now, like a lot of modern gamers.
Yeah, what was your table like for Vampire? I mean, you obviously had a gaming group that you played with. Was it the same group all the time? Did you kind of have an established relationship and trust with one another before kind of getting into a World of Darkness game? Or was that something that was a little bit more nebulous?
It was a little bit more nebulous. The first group kind of just came into it. I ran Hunter the Reckoning and weeded out the folks that just were there to try it and didn't like it and weren't gaming. But I was very, very close with all of the players. Like they were really close friends, and I wouldn't go to a game store and just pick up a game of Vampire. Like, never would I do that. Or run a game for people I don't know. So yeah, we were all really close friends. We saw each other almost every day. So there wasn't any explicitly talking about what's okay and what's not okay. But I think we're all on the same level. I had some depredations, but normally it was something that someone else was doing, and it was of shock and horror for the players to see, and not something that they were participating in. So that was interesting. And as you're saying about this like new group of things, as gaming becomes bigger and bigger and more people are doing it, you can get both sides. You can get these folks that are just in it for escapism and to have that fun little, couple hours of not being in the real world. But now there is like these really kind of in-depth folks that are like going into character nuances and wanting to do an exploration on their characters. There's some interesting games out there like Eclipse Phase, which deals with transhumanism, and your character is really hard to kill in that game, but it's very easy for them to go insane because of you're just getting that dissonance because you're no longer human and things are happening to you that keeps separating you from that until you finally have a break. And there's a couple other games out there. Remember the one that you're an insomniac and you kind of transfer to the world of nightmares and dreams. That was a cool little kind of.
It's really interesting what mechanics can do, right? Like when you look at the transformation of humanity type systems in Vampire, for instance, initially it was just you get edgier and darker, more vampiric. And then they started doing it where as you descended down the humanity tree, you became deranged. which on one hand is kind of very Cthulhu, very just like kind of classic horror. But on another hand, it almost kind of presents the idea that if somebody is atypical, in their neurochemistry, that they're somehow evil. And I don't think that was an intended consequence, but that's what came across.
Yeah, that's as a consequence. That's kind of a weird thing to touch on, but there's two ways. Like, there's people that have derangements that didn't do anything to deserve them, but as we're also going through and seeing, like, PTSD, the mental health is something that can degrade when the stuff happens to you, trauma and all this kind of stuff. So if you approach it correctly, I think you can present it right, but you do have a point of now it's saying mental health equals inhumanity. In the new system, you actually, like, that's your damage on the humanity meter. Like, before you lose a humanity, you start taking little ticks and neuroses, and then when you finally have a break, it goes to you lose your humanity and it goes to the next level.
Interesting. So, I mean, because you can really tell very specific stories using mechanics that without actually having to get narrative at all. Just the way it's designed, the packaging of that mechanic can really inform what's going on in your particular game's physics. And like, I think with what you're describing, that's a very different thing. Like these small incremental steps and then a ratcheting at the end. Like, is it actually kind of like the old humanity where it's like suddenly you have kind of prohibitions on what sorts of behaviors you're likely to perform?
Yeah, I believe so. Like, it kind of gives you that chart of what is, and in this one they tie it a lot more into your personal kind of philosophies.
Oh, good.
And what hits your brakes. Like, if you do this, if you're a person that says, I don't kill or hurt women or children, and something happens that they cause them harm, you start racking up those points until you get to the break.
All right, I like that style system. Because that was the one thing I really wasn't so sold on with the old vampire systems, is that they had a very prescribed set of ethos. It was like, this is the moral system. And it didn't really take in what a person's thought process was.
Well, and that was kind of true and kind of not true. Like, it was, but only if you were playing in the Camarilla. Because the moment you got into the paths, then all of a sudden there was a plethora of options. But you were considered evil and a bad guy if you had any of them. Like, if you weren't on humanity, you were clearly evil and bad. So there was all these other options. You just weren't allowed to actually use them.
Sorry, I'm trying to read the chat here to see what was said there. Yeah, it is a unique style with the dots and looking at the character sheet. And, I think with Vampire in the World of Darkness in particular, when you look backwards in time, it doesn't come across looking real good.
No.
But when you come from the time when it was coming in, they opened a lot of doors to some concepts in gaming that didn't exist in gaming. They hyper focused on storytelling to the extent that they even changed the name of your dungeon master to storyteller. Just a little subtle tweak there that changed the expectation of the table, I guess. If you looked at the character sheet, the number of things that were on that sheet that were not combat related was huge. And, as a D&D player, you look at it and you go, wait, the sheet isn't 100% combat? Like, what's going on? So it creates these different ways of looking at it. And I think our transformation as gamers from pure power gaming, dungeon crawler, power fantasy people to a more actory storytelling gamer could probably be traced directly back to Vampire or World of Darkness in general, I would think. I don't know if you would agree with that necessarily, but
I think for us it was, I still would point more to Larp, which technically, yes, was Vampire. But I mean, I think it was Larp that changed how we viewed playing games in general. Like, I look at even the tabletop games and the characters we made post Larp versus pre Larp are entirely different sphere of the level of background and the level of what we were attempting to do with our characters changed drastically. And you can say it's because we got older. You're talking the difference between
Possibly.
18-year-olds making characters and 25-year-olds making characters, whatever. I think I was 23 when I made Landon Kane. But nonetheless, it was still, I think that LARP had a lot to do with a lot of that.
Yeah. I see you flip it through the book over there to see
Yeah, I was trying
any
to,
details,
I
or
couldn't remember exactly, but the humanity track is dealt with as a damage track.
okay.
So you have your humanity score and however high it is, and you have the blank boxes.
Mm-hmm.
When you encounter or cause things that are against your tenants or against the humanity code and your personal tenants, you start taking what they call stains, and that's damage on the damage track of the clear boxes that go down to your humanity.
Okay.
At the end of the session, you have to come to some contrition. You have to feel guilt and remorse, and you roll any white boxes you have left over to try to get rid of the stains.
Hmm.
If you fail, you lose a humanity. If your slashes, if your white boxes ever get completely filled, you actually go into a state of degeneration where you actually you get negatives to dice pool. It has an end game because you're racked with guilt.
Mm-hmm.
You have to check for even frenzy, and then you'll lose your humanity at the end of the session.
Gotcha.
But the other interesting thing about the humanity,
We
We lost your mic there for a second, Wiley.
what? No,
You're
No.
back, but yeah, it was just that whole sentence was just
the humanity is a physical representation. Like it is how human you appear and look. So it's how much blood you have to spend to wake up in the day and in the night after day. So the more you go down, the more harder it is to be or look human, and the harder it is to wake up. You're going to be hunting every night to try to make up for what you're spending in blood and all that stuff. You get to the point where you cannot do the blush of life like you could in the old ones. All that kind of interesting stuff.
It seems like they actually put some consequence to it, because it seemed like in the old one it was just, wait, I get more freedom of action.
Well,
Yeah.
those things were still in the old systems if you go back and read.
A little bit, but they
just weren't
really
as
seem to matter
heavily
as much.
mechanicked. They would tell you that happened, but the amount of time you saw people truly portray it was, even in LARP, was still very rare.
Yeah, but I think we were inverted in our thinking too. We looked at humanity systems as like high humanity was prohibitive of creativity and storytelling, whereas as you went lower, you had a wider toolbox of scenarios you could participate in. And I think that was kind of screwed up thinking,
Yeah, it's if I can get down to 4 humanity, I'm going to have to make humanity checks when I murder anymore.
Yeah, I could start telling those stories like The Godfather now.
Well,
yeah,
I think the way I always looked at it was, I had a character who I was going to play. I think the problem with humanity sometimes was that your characters literally started higher than what they should have. Like, I think a lot of people played a character a specific way, and I'm using a LARP more as my reference for this than maybe tabletop. But like, you made a character who acted a certain way. That character was eventually going to settle in at a humanity that they truly belonged at. Very rarely were they going to dip below that, unless a situation occurred where they lost control, some sort of frenzy situation, then maybe they might find themselves below that finally. But for the most part, if you were stealing and you start out humanity 7, you started stealing, you were going to drop down pretty quickly. If you started killing people, you were going to hit down to that 4 or 5 range and settle in. Eventually, your play style of how you played that character, you settled where you needed to be. I don't know if it was so much prohibitive. It was just, eventually I will get down to where I'm going to be. Yeah, I'm going to lose a few, and I know that when I make the character, because this is the kind of person he is, instead of just literally
eventually you just hit that equilibrium.
Right.
And I like that there's mechanical punishments or consequences to having the low humanity in this one, because
that's good.
As you lower it, you become a walking masquerade violation.
Right.
Paler, your fangs are always out. Can't do any blush of life. You can't fake it. So I like the fact that there's a reason you want to keep humanity in this one.
Yeah, it's something they really needed to push harder in the older editions. I'm glad that they're learning from those mistakes, at least, and improving on their system. And of course, any game system is going to improve, hopefully, over time if they're taking feedback and really pay attention to what their product actually ended up being compared to what they thought it was. Let's see. Oh, Hey, Lord and
Lord-
Savior Ace. Welcome to
That's
it.
one of Wiley's big long-time supporters there, Lord and Savior Ace.
Yep.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, we're kind of in
He's
a
been around since the Rifts era.
Rifts. Oh, man. That is reaching way back.
Well, we were playing Savage Worlds Rifts.
Oh, okay.
Interesting. Kind of going back to the gaming culture. My
Yeah, let's
friend
do it.
Mitch, he was in the chat, rouged to death.
Mhm.
But he's on my stream. His brother and him saw the Rifts book in a bookstore, and they thought the cover art was really cool and the art, so they bought it, not knowing what a role-playing game was, and they read it cover to cover and then never played. And then I meet him in a bar one day, talking with my brother about dragon art for all things, and when they named one of the artists that was in both Rifts and D&D, he knew exactly who it was, and kind of like, yeah, I read the whole book and this and that, and that was just when the Kickstarter had started for Savage Worlds Rifts.
Oh,
So-
wow.
I got to bring him in and let him play the game that he's always, known and read and wanted to play.
It's funny how that works, because there were a couple books on my shelf that had like multiple game books that I never played once, like Robotech. I had a
Yeah.
bunch of Robotech. Never once in my life have I played Robotech.
We played my college age when I was in high school. The college age folks played Robotech constantly.
Yeah.
Specifically Southern Cross, for some reason. That was like their big one. They went through an entire campaign of boot camp to, being deployed. So it was big for them. But yeah, I have so many games back in the shelf that I bought and never played. They just kind of add to the mental arsenal.
I don't know why this came up. I guess maybe Robotech is just kind of military, and you said boot camp and stuff. I'm wondering if a big portion of gaming culture and that kind of bringing in more people to it may be people coming back from war. They have this kind of mentality of like, we were a band of brothers or whatever. We're tight. We had this goal-directed life. We had missions. We had to go out and go do things. We had danger and saving each other and that kind of stuff. And then you come back to civilian life, and now you're looking for that kind of group activity.
It is the one group I can say that is maybe the smallest portion of people I know who served in the armed forces play role-playing games.
And
I very few. Most of them are hunters. They like their guns. They like their outdoorsy stuff. Most of the ones I know are not into this sort of culture at all. So I don't know if I could go that far, Jeff, at all. But
interesting for me is every person I know that was in the military that's in younger age bracket, 20s to early 30s, every single one of them has played Dungeons and Dragons while deployed. I have not found a single military person of those age brackets that didn't say, oh yeah, I played that once or twice when we were deployed.
Yeah, growing up in our hometown, most of the people that were older than us that got me started in gaming were also military guys. So I don't know, maybe it's
I'm
a
not saying they were
different thing.
they
but
didn't keep playing or they whatever, but
we all got started before anyone could be in the military. So
within our group,
within our group, right? So I'm saying,
I'm just saying, not us specifically, but I'm saying with the era of like the post 9/11 kind of eternal war kind of scenario where people are getting deployed and then coming back, I'm wondering if that's kind of playing into it a little bit more, because I know with the MMO culture and online gaming in particular, there seems to be a very large number of people who have served playing those games.
I think you see a fair number of those people in the video game side of it for sure.
Yeah,
most of the people I know who were in the military, and I've been a fraternity advisor for 20 years for my college fraternity. So I've been advising young men who some had served in the military and were older students even when they came in. And all of them were into Fortnite, Overwatch, those competitive squad-based, like you say, going on missions, sure, out there in the fight, band of brothers sort of deal. You get that in those scenarios more so, I think, where those people are gravitate towards than in the fantasy realms.
Yeah, I think
I have to actually Nabicus. That's Invid Invasion. Southern Cross had the Alpha Betas and the Ajax tanks.
So not motorcycles.
No, sorry, Alpha Betas were also an invitation. They had Ajax, they had the tanks, they had helicopters, and they still have the Verit.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I kind of looking back at like wargaming culture, right? So you look at those, you know, especially like the tank-based games. It was a lot of I'm trying what it was like war memorabilia people or reenactment types. What am I thinking of here? I don't know what I'm thinking of. Sorry, but yeah, it seemed like there was a kind of a connection, maybe just to warfare that you don't get any other place besides in a fictional game. You know,
Yeah, maybe for older people before video games were big, but now video games are so big and so immersive, and multiplayer is the thing, and you can find it. Like I said, you can watch it like television on stream. You can watch it like, you know, there's celebrities now in this whole ordeal. Like, but if you look who those celebrities are, like, and you look at how those things are done, the people who follow that, like the people I know that were into, like I said, military type stuff, they really gravitate towards the computer gaming side. I just don't know if I see them in the wargaming front as much. My experience with wargaming is minimal. Jeff knows this. We had a very small group of wargamers we were a part of. But
when I would go to the gaming store that actually had like the Warhammer tables out, there were a fair amount of vets that I saw in there, people that were in the military.
I could see it being a draw for them. I just don't know how many I ever saw that were.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but it's like a very interesting thing. Like I've met like 6 or 7 people in the last year that are young in the military dudes that every single one of them, when we're talking about our stream or our game, like, oh yeah, I played D&D once when I was like every single one, like people that I would never have pictured as doing that, and they would never do it again. Like they just weren't gamers.
Well, it's a fascinating thing because I mean I didn't serve, so I don't have the experience of what it was like over there or what a day-to-day life was. But I imagine the earlier discussion we had of you want what you're not in. So if you have a chaotic and violent and uncertain environment that you're in, you know, deployment, you're looking for an environment that you have some control over, or a medium in which you have some control and some protection from consequences within that system. You know, we've talked about that magic circle concept of gaming. You know, like the consequences of a game stay within the game. You know, like you may be exciting and crazy if your entire dragonborn party gets wiped out by a dragon, but if it happens, that's just something that happened in a game. You know, like my house is still here. You know, I'm not going to miss a meal. No one I know is actually going to die. You know, like, so there's some niceness in that separation, I think, from what's happening in those games. And maybe that's appealing in that particular environment, but not once they're home. You know, like it's different.
It's possible. I think it's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting to talk to like Crazy Ike afterwards and maybe a few other people and get kind of their take on some of that. But I don't know for sure if I can see that large of a correlation.
There might not be any.
Hobby and those. I mean, in my opinion, I think is, you know, the tagline that's being used out there right now is that D&D's for everyone. And I totally 100% believe that, like I said, I could see it being a draw for people if they got introduced to it. But I'm not sure that's the avenue. I think when I look I'm on the Twitters a lot. And when I go out there on the Twitters and I'm reading through the tweets and everything else, like that is not the group that I see portrayed out there much. Maybe there's more of it than I realize, but it does not seem to be what I have located out there in the Twitter universe for TTRPG tweets or D&D 5e tweets.
Yeah,
sure.
But you look at our gaming group and you realize not a single one of us besides you has ever tweeted. So like maybe it's not, you know, 100% foolproof of finding people, you know.
And I'm sure that there's, you know, they're the hardcore military gamers that, you know, they go deployed and that's their, you know, 4-month campaign right there and they play. But how widespread is it and how common? It would be an interesting poll to throw out there.
It would be because, like, I know one guy we're going to have on in a couple of weeks. I'm pretty sure he serves and continues to serve, so it'll be interesting. Maybe we can bring it back up with him later. That'll be something I'll pitch to him in the meantime. So,
Yep, and this has been a whole segment of me just speculating about things I have no clue about.
we are here at about the 10-minute mark, so we are at a good point. We can start to wrap up a bit. So,
Yeah, this was an interesting one.
Wiley, why don't you go ahead and start off here with the closings and tell us where we can find you.
Oh, well, I am on Twitch. You can find me at Wileyverse. It's not there. The Karmic Cycle does have, if you go to the Twitter, it will have a link to my Twitch page. We have 2 scheduled games, one on Tuesday nights called Wiley vs. Mitch, where and it's not Wiley vs. Mitch, it's Wiley vs. Mitch.
Gotcha.
Where I explain a new game system or explain a game system that he's already played. Tomorrow was actually going to be Dungeons and Dragons. We go through, we explain a game, we make a character, we have some encounters and show how the game is played, and then I kill him with a magical creature to show what the in-game and progression is like. And then on Wednesdays is our long-running. We're going up to the episode, I think, 39 on this Wednesday. Wow. It's been over a year that we've been playing our long-running dragon campaign. They just hit a big milestone. They've slain the dragon, hit 10th level, and things are all going to go downhill from here. Nabicus and Giant Hippo in the chat, they're both players of mine. We try to pick up other games during the week when we can. We do some one-shots. We have a couple additional campaign kind of offshoots that I run just about every other week. I have a friend that's an archaeologist, and every other week he's out in the field for an entire 7-8 days. So we only get to see him when he comes back. But yeah, that's Wileyverse. You can see us there. I'm Wiley. That's the Wileyverse. Though a lot of people, when they read it, still want to say Willyverse.
Willie? No,
Willie.
No, it's definitely Wiley. Yeah, no, that's some cool stuff. Very, very neat stuff. And yeah, definitely 39 episodes. That's quite an undertaking.
Yeah,
congratulations on that.
That's the Dragonborn campaign. I'd run I think 17 episodes of the other D&D game before we TPK'd, and we had run the Rifts game. I think we were in 20 or 30. Well, no, it was about 20 or less episodes of that. So that's all in there. That's all on my YouTube.
Occasionally, you'll catch them playing Battleship.
Oh yeah, we try to do some board games. I got the Trogdor board game, and
Yes.
Oh man, I got to tune in for that one when you do.
Yeah.
Burninating peasants. Oh,
that's gonna happen.
Burninating the countryside.
Gotta get it, man.
Burninating peasants.
Me and
it was fun.
Me and a guy in Notorious DMG, One Crit Wonder. We were actually doing strong bad quotes back and forth earlier today, and I don't know if anyone else in Notorious DMG knew what we were talking about, but it was great.
I throw out some super obscure ones every once in a while that gets people. Come back, chocolates! I didn't mean what I said.
All right, yep.
So my favorite one to throw in.
People out there where they can find you.
Yeah, so I do a lot of Let's Play video game stuff. So I've been playing mostly Ark Survival Evolved lately, but we've been doing modded versions, PvP servers, PvE servers, a whole 9 yards. And I also about ready to start back up on the Pathfinder Kingmaker role-playing game. So I started it a while back and put it on the shelf and then kind of forgot about it. And I've got a lot of people wanting to see more of that content. So I'm going to start a new series of that probably in the next couple weeks. I just put out a video right before coming on here to kind of ask people about what direction I should take that. I have a class in mind, but I need to know about what people want to see in terms of alignment choices and how much narration they want from me, if they want just power gaming, if they want voices, that kind of stuff. So you're going to find my channel on the YouTubes, and it's Reign Survives. So it's REIGN SURVIVES. And actually, not a cleric. I'm going to be trying, I believe, a kineticist, because it's the one class I was really interested in that I knew I would never get to play. So So since it's in the video game, I'm going to check it out. And it does actually have an ability to heal. So sort of in that realm. But anyway, that's where you'll find me predominantly doing that. And I help admin on a server for another YouTube guy named Voxesto. So if you know about him, I do a lot of stuff with him. And his server is great. The Gentleman's Arc. Go check it out. Dustin, where can we find you?
All right. Well, I am Dustin. I am better known throughout the MMO community and most of the Discords I'm on as Gladius Rex, where you will find me at Plague State, where I play a lot of MMOs and stream a lot of that when I get the opportunity. You'll also find me here at TT2KB every Monday here on the Wisdom Check, and on Saturdays when available playing Everstorm. Our next Everstorm game still a couple of weeks out, but it is coming. You will get another. You will get to see. I don't know. Maybe we're going to get off this island. Maybe we're not. we aren't sure yet. But it's getting closer. The boat's looking more like a boat. It's going to be awesome.
I cannot wait to play some more Everstorm. I love that campaign.
August 7th, I am running a one shot on our friend channel there, Dadbot D&D. DM Bob, he was on the show a few weeks back, but they are doing one shots every Wednesday right before Wiley's on, actually, as a matter of fact. So you will be able to tune in at 8:30 Central Time to catch the Dadbot D&D crew helping community people come in and do basically pick up one shot D&D games. So it's been a lot of fun. They've done 4 or 5 of them now. Next week, there's one being ran by a member that's not of their crew. One of the first ones, I think, not being ran by a member of the Dadbot D&D crew. It's their first actual guest DM. And then I'm the week after that. You will catch my Escape from Cell Block 6. I've got my 4 players ready to go. And my 22 inmates that I'm going to have to voice. It's going to be great.
Oh, good Lord.
I'm on a voice acting clinic for one night, basically.
Oh, good stuff. I'll tune in for that.
So after that, I'm also now part of Notorious DMG, where you'll be able to find me every other Thursday playing 4th Ed D&D.
Nice.
And I might even be picking up a couple more games with them here in the near future. So be looking forward. If you haven't also gone over and followed at Notorious DMG, you should do so there. I think that is about it for right now.
Yeah, let's touch back in with our sponsor. We are now sponsored by Die Hard Dice. And definitely check it out in the panels below. Go seek out their dice. Awesome heavy metal dice. Doesn't get much cooler than that. And like we said before, we're going to be doing some giveaways. So you got to get us up to that follower count of 200. And then you guys have a chance to win. And then don't forget to help out Destination Fantastic's Kickstarter, Satine Phoenix, and make that happen, because I want to see that freaking show. Seriously, go check out that Kickstarter. Watch the little intro video and tell me you don't want to watch that show, because it looks freaking amazing. So go on there, help them out. And in fact, help us help them out so that we can give you guys cool swag.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about our future guests we got coming up.
Yes. More guests.
So next week here on the Wisdom Check, we have Leopold the Just coming to be with us.
Oh,
from
yeah.
The very popular Facebook group D&D Meme. He also is a player of the Goblin Bazio in Jousm, who now goes under the tag Grim and Perilous since he's been picked up by Zweihander. Grim and Perilous runs Forbidden Lands on Fridays and Mask of Nylothotep on every other Sunday. And Leopold the Just is a player in both of those games. So we'll have him on next week. And then we have, again, Satine Phoenix coming on August 12th. And we have the following week after that, Daniel D. Fox, the creative director for Zweihander RPG, is going to be joining us. And we are going to be talking Zweihander with him. So those will be some very interesting shows. And then there's a week in there before Satine where it's going to be Levi, our DM, who was our guest last week on here with Jeff. And they are going to be bringing One Crit Wonder, who's a member of Notorious DMG. He's going to come on here and talk some good stuff with the guys that week. So that's kind of our next month worth of guests. It's Leopold the Just, One Crit Wonder, Satine Phoenix, and Daniel D. Fox, and that's what we've got lined up for you guys going forward for the next month.
We've got just a smorgasbord of amazing people coming on, and I want to say thank you so much for coming on our show. I appreciate you, buddy. And yeah, well, I guess we'll see you guys next Monday.
Make sure you catch Wiley on Wednesday.
Thanks for having me.
See you there.
Peace.